Here we are.
How's it going, Robert?
Not too bad. So this is episode 6.
That's right.
Excellent. So 12 weeks we've been at this.
Yeah,
That's flying.
yeah, something like that. I think we had
12 or 13.
yeah, we had a week off at one point, so a little bit more than 12, I think. But
You're right, actually. I think yeah, exactly. That's right. Yes.
yeah, but in general, a good 3 months.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah.
Hmm. So there's a few things for us to talk about. Since our last episode, the Queen died, and now, of course, we have a king. You don't have a king, but I have a king now.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Um,
So coming from someone who has completely uh, avoided the subject of royalty, I'm a complete outsider to this whole thing. Tell me how this all works, especially for you as an Australian, and what the implications are of Charles III now.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm actually a dual Australian Canadian citizen, and they're both Commonwealth realms. So this means that even if Australia becomes a republic, which is likely to happen, I'll still have a king because Canada's not going to become a republic anytime soon. So, okay. So probably a little bit off topic, but I think it's probably interesting stuff.
Yeah.
The monarch of the United Kingdom had these great flowery titles, King of the United Kingdom and Emperor of India and all this sort of stuff, and that's great. But in 1931, they had something called they had a meeting. All the prime ministers of the UK and all the independent Commonwealth domain realms, as they called them, or the dominions, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Newfoundland, which was a separate country at the time, South Africa, I think that's it, all met and agreed on what to do because it was obviously the days of empire were over. So what to do going forward? They came up with this idea of the Commonwealth. And they ended up reforming the crown so that now the now Charles, previously Elizabeth II, is the King of the United Kingdom, but separately the King of Australia and the King of Canada and the King of New Zealand and the King of Jamaica, and on it goes. 15 at the moment. One of the interesting upshots of this is even if the United Kingdom became a republic tomorrow somehow, Charles would still be the King of Australia because it's a separate relationship. It's a separate legal relationship. And King of Canada, they'd all have to become republics before he'd stop being a king.
Yeah, so they're all separate 15 or so case-by-case basis.
Exactly, that's right. So technically they're 15 countries, all in there's actually a status called personal union, which means that they all have the same monarch, but are otherwise separate. Yeah. And so that's even a lot of people in these 15 countries don't realize that's the case. So yes, even if somehow the UK became a republic, he'd still be a king because he'd be King of Australia. So that's why I said if Australia becomes a republic, Canada's not going to become a republic anytime soon. So yeah, I'd still have a king. When I did my oath of my citizenship oath in Canada and became a naturalized Canadian citizen, I had to swear allegiance to the Queen of Canada. And I guess a lot of people kind of didn't really get the significance of that, but it's written right there in the thing, Queen of Canada. There's a reason for that. Yeah.
I see. Can you talk more about Queen Elizabeth? Because, like I just said, I've managed to avoid the subject of royalty so much to the point that I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. People are going to dogpile me on this one because she appears to be very well beloved, and good for them. But that's what I'm saying. I don't really know much about all this. So, do you have any thoughts about her time as queen and before and so forth?
Absolutely. So first of all, let me say that, and I don't often talk much about myself, but I will say this. I'm a Republican in the context of Australia, and that does not mean the same things in the US. Obviously, the US is a political party. Here,
Yes.
a Republican is someone who wants Australia to become a republic. And I actually voted for a republic, and we had a referendum in 1999. I was an adult at the time. I voted for a republic. It sort of narrowly failed. So anyway, it's been said for many, many years that after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, it's almost certain that Australia will have another referendum on becoming a republic, which touches on this issue. It touches exactly on what you were talking about, on how beloved she is. Really across the political spectrum, really across the entire spectrum of from monarchists to Republicans. There's really been a lot of respect for Queen Elizabeth. As I said, I'm a Republican, Australian Republican, but at the same time, I can't fault her on her dedication. I probably wouldn't say I was a fan, but I could never fault her on her dedication to the monarchy. And so she stuck to it right to the end. Never considered abdicating. She had the option to abdicate and let Charles go on the throne earlier. She felt that was the job that she'd been given, and she went and did it to the end. So yes, so she is really, really beloved throughout the now 15 realms where she's head of state. It's generally been the case, as I said, that countries that were one country to go, one of the countries in the Caribbean, Barbados, some of the realms became a republic a couple of years ago. But apart from that, the other countries just weren't considering it until she was gone. So now that that was out of personal respect for Queen Elizabeth II. So now that she is gone, Australia's going to have a referendum at some point in the next few years. I understand 6 different Caribbean countries that are Commonwealth realms are all looking at becoming republics. So it really was, everyone was holding off until she died, and now she's gone.
I see.
I think the number of those countries will likely become republics. So in the next few years, so she's had a huge amount of respect, as I said, and most people were really quite happy to put the issue off and until she was gone. But Charles is interesting. He's been king for a couple of weeks now, about 10 days or something, and he's already had a couple of PR disasters.
Really?
And he wasn't really that popular to begin with as a prince. So
why though? I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it, but I don't really know the details.
No, that's right. So he's had his ups and downs. I do feel sorry for poor Elizabeth. Her kids have really challenged her, I think, in some ways. A lot of them, like Andrew's been in the news a lot. Charles, that his problem with the problems in his marriage to Princess Diana, going back to the 90s. Being with Camilla on and off all those years. Now, of course, she's queen. So I think the kids really did challenge her. Charles, unlike whereas people have a lot of personal respect for the Queen, I don't think that's at all the case for Charles, and he's really got to he's got to establish himself as the king. And I think, and as I said, there've already been a couple of gaffes. There was one about the small table. Did you see that? The
small table. I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, there was a table. He had some very important paperwork to sign on his second day or so of being the king, and whoever's job it was, the table was too small, and you couldn't put all the papers he wanted. And his two sons had brought in this really beautiful inkwell set, and it was sitting on the table, but it was getting in the way of the paperwork. And I can understand he's a bit stressed. There's a lot going on. He's just lost his mother, and he's also just become king. And he sort of shooed the guy, if I could do it, he sort of shooed like that to one of his guys to come and move it. And a lot of people, he's got quite a little bit of backlash over that. I was a bit shocked by that too, but I thought I'll give him a little bit. I'll give him a little bit of slack on that, given that he was probably under a lot of pressure. There are how many tens of millions of people watching, but it probably could have been handled better. But whoever the person was, his job was to select the table. One job, and they failed. The table was definitely too small. That was the problem.
I see.
So, I think there may have been something else that happened too. I can't recall the details now, but it's only been 10 days. He's had a couple of gaffes. So, anyway, I think he's really got to establish himself. Oh, there's now a movement in the UK. Remember, not my president. Well, now there's not my king. Well, I'm sorry to all the people who are saying that, but until your country becomes a republic, he is your king, whether you like it or not. And I say that again as someone who wants Australia to become a republic. So,
yeah, exactly.
He's the king, and until it is interesting though. So some years ago, and I guess I love this stuff, history, but somebody in the Australian Parliament asked whether the Queen was an Australian citizen. This is back in the 90s, and nobody could answer the question. So all the legal experts, constitutional experts, ran off and worked on it. And they ended up deciding that she was not a citizen of Australia, but she had an absolute right to enter and remain in Australia. So, which is really interesting. She's kind of above the law in that regard. So she just comes to Australia and stay as long as she wants, or he can now. Now Charles could simply come here and when he stay here. And my understanding is that when he's here, we have a Governor General who's sort of the stand-in for the king, and he signs assent bills and so forth. I believe that it's my understanding that when the king is physically in the country, the governor general basically doesn't have a job. So the king signs all the bills. So it's interesting. And we have a head of state that lives on the other side of the world. Anyway, so I think that I guess the short version is that I think that Charles really has a bit of an uphill battle ahead of him. He's already had those couple of gaffes. He wasn't popular to begin with for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm more curious about. Right. I understood he has some controversies.
Yeah. Well, there were various things around his marriage and so forth, and his time with Camilla. If anyone who hasn't seen it, there's a great series called The Crown that talks about the royal family. And I'm a bit of a history geek, but they unturned a bunch of really interesting stories about the monarchy that I didn't know previously.
Yeah, I think my wife also.
Right, I'd highly recommend it. Yeah. He's also got a bit of a habit of perhaps talking down to people, or sounding like he's talking down to people. That may not be intentional. His accent too may not help with that because it's received pronunciation, and he's just got a little bit of. I think that's my impression. He gets a little bit of that attitude, a little bit of that reputation. That he goes and he might be talking about the environment, or he might be talking about architecture because that's a bit of a love of his. Mm-hmm. I think there may be this perception he's a little bit divorced from the world too. That's probably partly true. He has done a few things that are quite interesting. I mean, he has served in the military to some extent, and he went to school here in Australia for a while. I think it was only about 6 months, but I think that was done to sort of give him a bit more of a grounding in the real world. I don't know if it's completely deserved, that reputation that he's got, that he's probably a little bit divorced from the world, but there it is.
Right, because the reason I'm trying to ask these questions is because even in the men's movement, I see a lot of respect for the Queen, but they're also among the people that think that we are now in the dark ages now, or at least in the UK and so forth, because it's King Charles. So I'm just curious as to why the men's movement, members of the men's movement of all people, think this way, considering the sex dynamic here.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, as for myself, I neither like nor dislike Elizabeth II, but I will say that virtually everybody around me, I remember in some of our internal chat channels actually within Men's Rights, just after her death, all the guys were really, all they had were positive things to say about her. And that's generally true among all the Commonwealth realms. Personally, myself, I neither liked or disliked her, but I knew that there was no possibility of Australia even having that referendum on being a republic until after she died. It just wasn't. It was completely off the table. And even staunch monarchists admitted, staunch Republicans rather, both sides admitted this was the case. Yeah. So, but yeah, he's said he's had a bit of ups and downs, and he hasn't had the best reputation as Prince Charles. And I think he's really got a bit of an uphill battle, actually. So, I mean, I've heard people say he should abdicate in favour of his son William, William, by the way, also has a very positive reputation.
Okay.
So, which is interesting. I neither like nor dislike William. He has a much better reputation than his father, and will almost certainly be a more popular king than his father.
I see.
But Charles could be on the throne, assuming he doesn't abdicate. He could be on the throne for 20 years or more. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because we're kind of living in this feminist saturated world, and the idea of any nation of any Western nation having a king almost sounds like an affront to a queen is more tolerated, and it has been tolerated up until her death apparently, but
I did think it was kind of funny, actually, that within the space of about a week, the UK went from a male prime minister to a female prime minister, and a female monarch to a male monarch. Yeah. It was almost like the sort of balance there, but I thought that was cute. So that all happened within the space of about a week.
Okay. So see, I'm so out of touch from these things, I didn't even know that the prime minister's sex shifted.
So Boris Johnson, who was, of course, the PM who took the UK through Brexit, his prime ministership was imploding for about the last 3 months, and basically he admitted that he was going, and then there were two front runners appeared, a woman and a man, and they sort of battled it out, and then the woman won, whose name I should know, and it's slipped my mind now, but yes, the UK now has a female prime minister. Yeah, in fact, I've heard a number of MRAs actually speak positively about her as well. Actually, while we're on the topic of her, whose name I should really remember. She's actually a pissed off feminist, if you'll excuse my French.
Okay.
She's actually, there was a position in her cabinet, in the previous cabinet, Minister for Equalities and Women or something, and she changed the title to a Minister for Equalities and appointed a man.
Okay. Yeah.
And she's really annoyed the feminists doing it.
Sure.
So, and I don't, Liz Truss, and I actually already liked her.
Isn't she the one that said that she was going to outlaw catcalling?
Maybe actually, yes. I don't recall that actually, but you may be right. I knew there was something that got mentioned, but I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But let's look it up. I'm also a bit of a fan of CANZUK, which is a proposal for the four very wealthy English-speaking countries other than the US to have a closer association to back each other politically and kind of be another, what they call another pillar of the West. And Liz Truss also seems to have been a bit pro-CANZUK. They don't quite come out and say it, but I liked her on that point. Okay, let's look into that to see whether she said that or not.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like the name that was associated with that, and it's been a while, so I don't really remember, or I don't really have anywhere handy to go to verify this one. I don't think it'll be said in the Wikipedia or anything like that.
No, I did find something. I'll make wolf whistling and catcalling illegal. Yep, she did say that in July this year.
Oh God.
So there we go. Well, might be a bit of a mixed bag, but I did find it was interesting what she did with the Minister for Equalities of Women, and now it's the Minister for Equalities and there's a man in the role. So,
right.
Yes. So anyway, So there was something else I was going to mention about the monarchy. So no, that's all right. It'll come back to me. Yes.
What's the purpose exactly of this monarchy if we have things like prime minister? See, this is how stupid I am.
No, it's all right. It's quite different to the US. No, it's a very different system. So in the US, the head of state and the head of government are the same person. In a Commonwealth country, or it's actually in a country of the Westminster system, there's a separation. So the head of state is the monarch, but the head of government is the prime minister. And there's meant to be kind of a checks and balances there. There's some problems with the way the system works in the UK, in particular. I think it's actually worked better in Australia and Canada. Australia and Canada both had in the past a constitutional crisis, one each, where the Governor General, who's a representative of the monarch, has had to step in and basically use what are called the reserve powers, which is basically undefined powers that the intent of which is to restore functional government. And in both cases, the Governor General correctly stepped in and restored functioning government. But I've noticed that the Queen was unwilling to do. I think has always been unwilling to do this. I think if she was ever going to do it, it would have been Brexit. So it's strange that the Governors General act in this manner in the Queen's name, but the Queen herself and now the King. Well, Elizabeth seemed unwilling to use those powers, and it'd be interesting to know if Charles ever would. But it's interesting that the Governors General have used them, but the monarch of the UK seems like it's a step too far. So, and I think if the Queen could have stepped in for Brexit and tried to sort things out, but didn't.
Well, since we're on the subject, what are your thoughts on Brexit?
So I was a closet Brexiter.
Okay.
I was a closet Brexiter. I'm not a British citizen or a citizen of any EU country, so it's no direct impact on me. But the reason I'm a supporter of Brexit is because I was hoping for CANZUK to move forward, and I thought it was easier post-Brexit, and that is still likely, and it has moved a little bit in that direction, perhaps not as much as I would have liked.
What did you say it was? CANZUK?
Sorry, so CANZUK. CANZUK is a proposal. Yeah, it's Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. So they come up with the name CANZUK.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah.
And the proposal is for the four countries to essentially work more closely together to support each other politically and potentially have liberalised visa movement, so free movement to some extent. Not like the EU, but the idea is to make things a little bit easier to move between them. And basically to protect the institutions of the West is the idea. So, and I felt it was easier if the UK could get out of the EU, and I think they have moved a bit that way.
Right. One thing that's been perplexing about those who were disappointed by the fact that Brexit even happened is that why do they want to stay in a corrupt or institution like the United Nations. Why are they so adamant about that?
Oh, I thought you were going to say corrupt institution like the EU, but yeah, fair enough. That's
I'm sorry, the EU. That's what I meant.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah, the EU's really, when you start to look at it, it's really quite non-democratic in many ways. There is a European Parliament, but its powers are very limited. It's not like the national parliaments of the UK or France or Germany or anything like that. Nigel Farage was quite right to criticise it the way he did. And so I think from that point of view, getting out of the EU, and of course it's funny because then all the EU representatives started talking about reform. Well, maybe you should have looked at reform 20 or 30 years ago and you might not have lost the UK.
Exactly, yeah.
So it took a shock like that for them to look seriously at reform. So hopefully they do sort themselves out and become a bit more democratic. But I think the UK is better off out.
Yeah, I'd like to think so too. I mean, there's still lots of getting used to. I'm not even a UK citizen, but I can tell that everybody's kind of, how do I put it? It's like things are kind of feel difficult. They always blame Brexit. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess that was probably inevitable. And now, of course, Remainers have become rejoiners, but I think, and there may be an attempt to rejoin the EU, but the UK got a lot of opt-outs the first time around, and I just can't see the EU offering that again. So if they do join the EU again or attempt to, they would have to do so on, I think, very different terms than they had before. And I suspect that will probably be too much for a lot of British people. That's my suspicion.
Right. So do you have anything else on the pipeline here?
Yeah, so we've launched a new series of articles called What Men Do on A Voice for Men. Okay. And these are articles we talk. Now, there's a lot of negative discussions about men in the media and the broader society. And I was looking again at Mona Al-Tahawi today. I've mentioned her before a few times in our show. So she's an Egyptian-American feminist who openly calls for violence against men. Somebody on a YouTube comment today happened to make a comment about this, and somebody said, no, she doesn't. All I had to do was link to a video she's done previously. And here, have a look at this. Then I hope you enjoy it. She very clearly is calling for violence against men. So anyway, so in response to all of that, we've launched this this new series. And the first one's gone out today. And at this stage, the plan will just be to run one per week, probably on Sundays, just for something a little bit different. So it's not directly men's rights related or related to men's issues or anything like that. It's just talking about men who have done great things.
Well, that's important for the men's movement and men's issues. I think highlighting what they actually do best out of their own free will is one of the greatest ways of example setting and serve as inspiration, as archetypes even, which I think that's the kind of thing that the men's movement really, really needs. So I think
absolutely. I agree, actually, and it's right, because we often talk about negatives, don't we? And it's good to talk about the positives and talk about these men that have done these great things.
We also talk too much about how men live for others' endpoints instead of doing something awesome for its own sake.
That's right. They're often talking about men breaking free of that and focusing on their own needs a bit more and so forth. But yes, offering people those examples of men who have done great things, and there are so many men who have done amazing things. You often see feminists will circulate lists of female scientists and so forth, and who have done really impressive work. But quite frankly, a lot of those lists have the same names on them, right? And I decided to launch a list of men. This is on Wiki for Men, and it's 365 men who have done some sort of great advancement within science or mathematics or related to STEM fields, essentially.
Sure.
And I decided, I've picked their birthday, so it's as the sort of the metric. So I'm building a complete list. I haven't quite completed the list, but I'm still going. It's taking a while because there's a lot of them. But I'm eventually going to have a list of 365 men who have done amazing things and listed by their birthday. So I think that there are so many men out there who have done extraordinary things. Eratosthenes, excuse me.
Eratosthenes, I think.
Eratosthenes, thank you.
Yeah.
he's the first of the men who have listed for these for the YouTube videos.
Mhm.
And I found a great video by Carl Sagan, which talks about how he determined that the Earth was a sphere and measured it to within a few percent, using
Right.
nothing more than shadows and sticks.
Yes.
And it was such an intellectual leap to make that it's just absolutely extraordinary, given the time in which he was alive and the information available. So,
Right.
So, and the next one is a Japanese gentleman who was a diplomat in Lithuania during World War II. And nobody's quite sure how many lives he saved, but it was in the thousands. Even a conservative estimate puts it at 2,000 lives.
Sure.
And the number may be as high as 6,000. And he was a Japanese diplomat, and he issued at least 2,000 visas for Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust. And he basically gave them the ability to enter Japanese territory. And because of this, apparently they had the ability to enter Russia, to cross over into Japan. And
Right.
so he was able, but he was breaking the rules of the system, where he was only supposed to be granting these visas to people who could afford to pay and keep themselves and so forth. And he was just writing out, apparently 18 to 20 hours a day, he was writing these visas out for as many people as he possibly could. And he got, so they're not sure exactly, somewhere between 2,000 and 6,000. One possibility is that it was 2,000 visas, and the average, and each visa covered 3 people, which would account for the 6,000. So it may be as many as 6,000 people that he actually saved, which is an extraordinary number.
Right.
And anyway, so that will be, so I'll be posting a video on that on A Voice from In next week.
Okay. Sounds good. So what else do we want to talk about today? We are at the half-hour mark.
Cool, no worries. As I said, I'm happy to just go on, and as long as we've got things to talk about. Let's see what we've got here on my list. Yes. Oh, yes, I mentioned Mona Al-Tahawi. Yes, Nora Vincent, I think we did mention that Nora Vincent passed away.
Yeah, we talked about
that. That's right. That was a few weeks ago. Yep. Actually, so here's something interesting. Now, I'm quite interested in, I have a lot of interest in history and all sorts of other areas, as people know. I was interested in today listening to a video on demographics while I was driving along. And by the way, YouTube videos are absolutely fantastic. Just listening to them, you get about 90% of the information just by listening to them. So I often have them, streaming and listening while I'm driving somewhere. This one was about demographics, and it was quite interesting. It was so the developed world, apart from the US, the developed world has been in negative. It's had a low enough birth rate that it would be natural population decline for some time. The US hung on for a while, but since the global financial crisis, its birth rate too has fallen. But even the developing world now, the birth rate is starting to fall in a lot of countries. Africa, I think, is the only area of the world which is going to continue growing likely to keep growing in the decades to come. Anyway, I was listening to this video, didn't think it would have anything to do with men's rights or men's issues at all. And what do they start talking about? But men without work, and linking this to the demographic fall. And I've since found out that the gentleman who I was listening to, I can't recall his name, unfortunately, but he's got a book. Let me see if I can find it here. Here we go. So he's got a book. The book is entitled Men Without Work, America's Invisible Crisis. His name is Nicholas Eberstadt. Haven't read the book, but I'm planning to. Okay. I've looked at a few reviews. He's certainly talking about the issues. I don't think he touches on it. In fact, I'm quite certain he doesn't touch on anything like MGTOW. I think he may be even missing that aspect of it. But what he does admit is that a lot of the men, it's not just men can't get work, it's that men are choosing not to work. He does mention that. So he mentioned that in the recording that I listened to as well. So he's got that far. He's realizing that it's not just a bunch of men who can't find work. It's a bunch of men who have decided to disengage from the system. Now, he's talking specifically in an American context there, where I think the problem is actually a bit more severe than in other countries. And he does also, and he also talks about which we've talked about before as well, the prison industrial complex, where it's churning out men, a lot of black men, but also other men who are coming out as felons. And not surprisingly, they have a lot of trouble finding work as well. And a lot of them may be simply disengaging from the system.
That's true. It seems like, having done one's time is not quite enough. you're still branded with that reputational and baggage from your history and such. So, and
Exactly.
And that in itself is not even a deterrent from crimes if it's even a crime that's worthwhile to actually incarcerate for. So.
Well, that's right. And a lot of them, of course, are drug-related offences, and they may be relatively minor. And, of course, within men's rights, the overwhelming position is most of us feel the war on drugs has failed. I think that's a pretty fair statement.
Exactly.
And it's primarily targeting. And what they have with the war on drugs, of course, pushes these primarily men into the system where they become felons. And of course, they power these private jails, private prisons that the United States has, and then come out felons, and they can't or won't get back into the workforce because they're disengaged. And the cycle continues, and often they may end up committing more crimes. So there's a number of issues there. There's obviously the prison industrial complex and the fact that we've got the men disengaging now. Personally, I don't know how you feel. I think there's two sides to it. There's one side that these men have decided, yes, I can't, or I'm not interested in playing that game anymore because the system is hostile to me. But on the other hand, people do, their self-esteem does build by achieving as well.
Yes.
So these men they're sitting at home, maybe smoking or whatever, and playing video games or whatever. And on the one hand, I've always said this, in a lot of cases, it's totally rational for them to disengage. But on the other hand, it is unfortunate they're not getting the opportunity to build their self-esteem and achieve perhaps what they might have achieved otherwise.
Right. And then there's the stigma that they are playing video games and doing drugs.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's right, exactly. And the aspect that you see in some Asian countries where video games are now a spectator sport is only just catching on. I think in the English-speaking world. But I think South Korea and possibly also Japan, that's a fairly big thing.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think there's some in Russia. It's definitely a big Asian thing, and in the United States too. In fact, before I moved to Florida, there was some kind of esports. I think it was League of Legends happening live in the Mall of America. I just sauntered into the Mall of America because there's a restaurant I like there, but. And in the big hall, there was an actual gathering of there were two League of Legends teams sitting on their phones with a big screen on top. So that was a interesting thing, and it was for a few days too. So I visited the Mall of America often because of that restaurant. But right, yeah. Yeah, so since we're on the subject, have you heard of the incident with an esports company? I think that's what it was. I don't know the full details because I'm not an esports person, but it's something I heard of. Yeah. They tried to put together an all-female esports team, and they disbanded incredibly fast because they had the record in the fastest loss in any competition.
Is that right?
Yeah,
I hadn't heard of this because I don't follow. I'm not much of a computer game player, I don't follow esports at all.
Yeah, I don't play esports myself. I'm more of a tabletop games kind of guy, but I'll do some quick research.
Yes. So that is really interesting, actually. So there's an interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go on.
No. An all-female Russian League of Legends team. Apparently, they lost horribly. I can't tell what constitutes a horrible loss or anything, but supposedly it was terribly embarrassing. Right.
I'd like to find a little bit more about that, actually.
Maybe I'll prepare by next time.
Yeah. It's interesting that they chose that particular aspect to make an all-female team versus, say, having an open team where you let men and women. Because I would imagine that most teams are completely open. I'm sure it's unlawful to discriminate on the basis of gender with selection in a team like that. I think in an open category. So I would imagine that women are free to join the open teams if possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard some Brazilian team has one, maybe two uh, female players in their team or something like that. I don't know the details. Like,
Yeah.
I just know this happened, and I just speak off the top of my head about it. Yeah, so the all female team Davictus, I think it's called Davictus Esports. So averaging 27 deaths a game, the female team has been kicked from the LCL or something. So this is just some headline I'm seeing.
Okay.
Yeah. So if anybody's listening that does esports or follows esports, it'll mean more to them. But
sounds like they play video games like me.
Yeah.
Yes, I won't claim to be very good at them at all. But no, let's check that out for next time. Actually.
Yeah, I think I'll make it a point to.
Yeah. So there's a new movie out about the Dahomey Amazons, which is interesting. I don't know much about it, but from what I understand, this new movie is trying to portray. So Dahomey Amazons were female warriors in Africa, in the kingdom of Dahomey. So there have been a few groups of female warriors throughout history.
Right.
They're often in a place, and I think this is also the case for the Dahomey warriors. After the number of men started to decline, I think is when these things really started to take off. But there's a new movie that's out at the moment, and I understand there's been some discussion about them being the movie sort of portraying them as anti-slavery, and of course Dahomey, the kingdom of Dahomey, was anything but anti-slavery.
You're talking about the woman king, right?
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and I've been told that it tries to portray them as being anti-slavery, but I said Dahomey was anything but anti-slavery.
Right, they were slave dealers, right?
They were raiding nearby nations and capturing their citizens and selling them off, using slaves locally and also selling them off to others, including Europeans and so forth. So and Arabs. So yes, I think if the Dahomey warriors, the Dahomey Amazons, were certainly would not have been any more anti-slavery than anybody else in their kingdom.
Right.
So it'll be interesting. Yes, it'll be interesting. That's another good one for us to look into down the road, actually.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's funny. I'm kind of reminded of Springtime for Hitler. I mean, it's just an ironic version of portraying a slave driving or tyrannical or otherwise authoritarian force, and with no sense of irony. It's yeah, like, but I don't know why. Maybe it's because I watched The Producers recently.
Do you want to explain the plot of that movie?
Okay, so okay, so have you not seen The Producers?
I don't know if I've seen The Producers, but I do know of Springtime for Hitler.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, so it's Mel Brooks's first movie, right? Mm-hmm. And basically the plot is two guys. A character portrayed by Zero Mostel and an accountant portrayed by Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder's character kind of gets talked into by the other director guy, who's the Zero Mostel character, to make the worst play imaginable, and then get like funds from like myriad sources and rack up millions. Have it fail so they don't have to pay off the backers, right? Okay, so that's what their scheme is.
It's a scam, yeah.
Right, yeah. Right. And they find this play called Springtime for Hitler by this German kind of exiled refugee kind of guy who supposedly used to be in Nazi Germany, right? And so they think this is the perfect play for this whole scam, right? But as it turns out, So they have this play, and at first it looks appalling because it's glorifying, Hitler's military and stuff like that. But because of their casting choices, the play turns out to be a comedic genius, and it becomes so popular that their scam failed completely. Yeah.
And you know what? I have seen it, but I think I was a kid, so I think I should probably go see it again. Actually, yeah.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I kind of want to talk about that because you can't make a movie like that anymore because Mel Brooks was Jewish, and but this is a movie making fun of Nazism in like the most funniest way. You can't do the whole springtime for Hitler thing because people will think you're a Nazi or something like that. We're kind of in a weirder place than even back then, but
yeah.
Right.
Yes, it is. It is unfortunate, isn't it? That people. I mean, I guess Mel Brooks could get away with it at the time because he was Jewish. But yes, even someone who was Jewish now couldn't possibly produce cinema like that. Mm-hmm. And of course, he made fun of Nazis quite a lot. Actually, he actually did a music video at one point where he was dressed up like Hitler. But if you get a chance, watch the music video. It's really good. I love the song, but it's a great music video. And watch out for the fact that. Even though there's a lot of Nazi paraphernalia in the music video because he's portraying Hitler, there's no swastika on his uniform, which I thought was a really nice touch.
Interesting.
So no time. He's not actually wearing a swastika. There's swastikas around, but he's not actually wearing one, which I thought was a really good way of sort of probably dealing with that issue of him not wanting to wear it. But you really don't notice it at first. You have to watch for a while before you notice it. Right. The swastika's not there.
Yeah, but and the producers, there's during when the stage the play is happening and like the dancers are doing the singing, it's actually Mel Brooks that's overdubbing a line that says, just imagine Mel Brooks saying this because he does. Don't be stupid, be a smarty, come and join the Nazi party. Imagine Mel Brooks saying that. It's just funny, that he could just say that in like good mocking humor.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And people at the time got it because people at the time apparently had a sense of humor.
Well, yeah,
it seems to be. Yes, it seems to be something is. It's true. Something is missing now from Western culture where perhaps we can't laugh at ourselves so much, and we've got to. And it must be very hard on comedians, stand-up comedians too, because their material is going to be quite limited. Yeah. So.
Right.
Yes, that's so that is quite a problem, and I think and really speaks to freedom of expression and so forth that we're really losing in the West. And it goes along with partisanship too. There's increasing partisanship in the West. Everything's seen through a partisan lens. I mentioned before that I'm a Republican in the Australian sense. I've actually here in Australia said I'm a Republican and had people think that I was an American Republican too. So
wow.
Which doesn't make any sense. I'm not a US citizen or resident, so it wouldn't make any sense.
Are there people that respond the same way about the liberal democratic? Did they take it in the American sense there in Australia too?
So the Democrats, no, I think. Well, I think a lot of Australians are probably fairly cognizant of the two American parties, But I think people who are critical of the Republicans are probably a bit more vocal about it. That would be my perception.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Yes. But American parties are different to our parties. That's been my I've never lived in the US, but I used to live 45 minutes from the US border, so I did go there quite a lot.
Sure.
And I sort of took an interest in the country while living in Canada too, and I thought about this quite a lot, and I ended up concluding that American parties are much more broad in their scope than Commonwealth parties. A lot of people outside the US look down on the US because it's only got two political parties, essentially two that are worth mentioning.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, and whereas in most Commonwealth countries there's usually two or three dominant, but there are quite a number of others that are players as well. But what I ended up concluding was American parties are much more broad in their scope than parties in, say, Australia or Canada or the UK are. And you'd almost see, I would say, the equivalent of an American political party would be a coalition of parties in somewhere like Australia.
Exactly. The political parties here try to be as big tent in their approach as possible, if that's the right expression, because it's a big enough country, and they try to rack up everybody, and they try to make it this whole big thing. Like even a year or even two before the election even happens, it feels like election season. It's part of the reason why I've kind of I've hated it. I'm just sick and tired of all the conflicts and the strife, and it just it keeps on happening, and it keeps on lingering on too, and it just brings out the worst in a lot of people, I think. So I've always found it distasteful that it's such a thing.
I think that's a really good way of putting it, a big tent. I think that's a great way of explaining it, actually. One of the things I noticed, too, is that so we have a term here. I don't know if it's in the use of the US. It's called crossing the floor. And that means somebody from one political party essentially votes against their own party.
Right.
And it's relatively rare in Commonwealth countries, but it varies. In Australia, it will potentially get someone booted out of their political party. It's that bad. Yeah. It's that serious, just across the floor. Whereas in the US, it's not that unusual for a few Democrats to vote with Republicans or vice versa and so forth. And that comes back to that big tent approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's known to happen, like not just during the whole the Trump-Clinton thing, the Trump-Biden thing. It was even before. It was during the Kerry-Bush era and the McCain-Obama, Romney-Obama. Just it's been all over the place in terms of that. But I'm assuming crossing the floor is put that way because it doesn't quite happen as much.
Oh no, it's relative. It varies a lot. So the Commonwealth countries are a little bit different. Canada, I think, has had more of it. The UK a little bit more. Australia has really the Australian political parties have really been quite intolerant of it. Mm-hmm. And I said people would get punished for crossing the floor potentially. Oh. In some cases, thrown out of the party, that sort of thing. They really they have what's called strong party discipline in Australia, where the parties really demand orthodoxy from them in terms of how their members vote. So if there are 23 members of a particular party in Parliament, then that party expects 23 votes in the way that they want to vote. Whereas as you say, in the US, that isn't necessarily the case. So I think people like myself on the outside looking in, if we're in Australia or Canada, a lot of us can be a little bit down on the US in the sense that it seems a two-party state. But I think that's probably not a little bit undeserved, actually, given that the parties are so broad. There's options for variations of opinion and so forth within the parties and opportunities for sort of freedom to move around a little bit in there. So I think, I think all in all, your two-party system probably doesn't work that badly, actually, given that the political parties do have the ability to have a bit of different disagreements internally and still survive.
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Yeah. There are a few things in the US system that seem strange, like the filibuster. Of course, is the filibuster confounds most people when they first learn about it. Probably Americans too. So. For those who don't know, go on.
Yeah. I'm remembering Rand Paul having a filibuster over drone strikes, I think it was, which I thought was pretty impressive at the time, really. Yeah. But, it actually kind of opened my mind to how ridiculous some on the left could actually be. Because, while this was happening, I was kind of rooming with some other people in Code Boot Camp. And they were talking about it, and they were clearly liberals, and they just wanted Rand Paul to shut the F up, right? See, about drone strikes, this is why since that day I decided that I couldn't trust liberals on being anti-war anymore.
Right. Yeah. So it was all over the filibuster. So for those who don't know, a filibuster can only work in the US Senate, not in the lower house. And basically somebody can keep talking and keep the session open and prevent a vote. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea is actually until the session expires or something, isn't it? And
right.
And so basically you can try to prevent a vote by continuously talking. There was a fairly famous case going way back decades where the guy who was filibustering ran out of things to talk about and picked up a copy of the tax code and started reading from it. As long as you kept talking, that's all that was required.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that some of us find that is a bit of strange characteristic of American politics.
Right, but I thought it was pretty effective. Well, I don't know about effective, but it was impressive when Rand Paul did it back in 2000. I'm trying to remember the year. I think it was 2013, late 2013. That's when it happened. So
certainly probably requires some stamina.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Yeah. I've said before that Rand Paul is not his father, but there are things I like about him, this included. So.
I don't know much about him, actually. I know Rand the name, Paul? But
Yes, a son of Ron Paul, who was said. Ron Paul himself was said to be like the gateway for many into like more libertarian ways of thinking, if not libertarianism itself. Right. He never to my knowledge, departed from the Republican Party, but he's basically generally said to be like the libertarian guy among the Republican Party. And yeah, Rand Paul is more of a staunch conservative Republican in the United States, but still lots of animal things about him. Yeah. But I've been off the grid for a long time. Like during the first Trump-Clinton thing, I disengaged completely from politics. I haven't followed anybody almost virtually since. Though, of course, the next time around, I actually ended up voting for Trump. But that was kind of a, I guess the one before, at that time, I've lost any kind of esteem for the Libertarian Party, that I just decided even they were not actually worth voting for, because the one previously was Gary Johnson, and he was going on a downward spiral of anti-libertarian sentiment. Not the least, which is including Bill Weld as his running mate, which was almost like a cross between a liberal and a weird neocon or something like that. It's very weird that anyone. He even called him the first libertarian, which is strange. And the big thing that stands out about Gary Johnson was that was the bake the cake thing. Do you know what the bake the cake issue was?
It sounds sort of familiar, but I don't really recall the details.
Okay, so it's this kind of what I personally consider to be like a libertarian litmus test. Basically the idea was that so this stems from a cake shop, a cakery, refusing to sell a cake to a gay couple, right?
Oh, right. I remember. Right.
Yeah, that's okay. Yes. So you know what I'm talking about. And Gary Johnson's position was that the cakery should bake the cake. But a lot of us in libertarianism say that is an anti-libertarian sentiment, because I don't find someone else to do the cake. They'll probably will exist. Just let this cakery be if they don't believe that gays should be married. It's not even some people are even framing this as bigotry, but I don't agree, because it's not bigotry. If like say for instance, I'm not a terrible fan of rap music, but it's not bigotry if I don't want to work with somebody on a rap track.
Yeah.
Right. So
you're saying the market essentially can find somebody else to
exactly
provide the service.
Yeah, sure. But Gary Johnson was so adamant that everybody should be, he was framing it in this way that everybody should do everything everyone asks for, which is positive rights. It's entitlements. It's not negative rights. We're back in the whole positive rights, negative rights thing, but he doesn't understand it. He didn't understand it. So it made me completely disillusioned with Gary Johnson. He was also for things like universal health care, which is also a contentious point in the Libertarian Party. But for many, many reasons, he lost esteem. And for me included. So
yeah, and that's a bit unfortunate, given that he was the presidential candidate at the time. So the Libertarian Party, yes. Right. Yeah, that's one difficulty with the American system, I do think, is the fact that you have what could be described as a first-past-the-post system, where you essentially vote for a candidate, and someone like a libertarian candidate can potentially draw votes away from one of the other parties and thus deliver what could be described as the undesirable candidate. So
exactly.
We use a system, go on.
Yeah, which is kind of weird, because, I've not, I might be getting some figures wrong, but I've not seen a candidate break 3%, a third-party candidate break like a very small amount of percent. Yes. So it's,
and it can discourage people from voting for them too, because they either think they may not make it, or they think if they vote for the minor party, their vote won't go to the major party. In Australia, we use a system called preferential voting, and having voted in Australia and Canada, I've seen the relative systems. But essentially, under preferential voting, you can vote for your preferred candidate, say in your case, the Libertarian Party, if it happened to be the case, and your vote can still flow. If they don't get in, your vote can still flow to another party that you would prefer. Say you might, for example, say you prefer the Republicans over the Democrats, and if your preferred candidate, the Libertarians, didn't get in, your vote would still go to the Republican Party, so that it would not be lost, as it were. Yeah, so it's becoming more popular around the world, but Australia's been using it for about 100 years. And I think it works quite well. It means you can vote. It means if there's a minor party you like, you can vote for them, confident that even if they don't get in, your vote will flow to one of the others that you would have otherwise voted for anyway.
Right. Yeah. And because of the big tent nature, like I said, of the two parties, it's become this kind of strategic sort of a very bad kind of pragmatist kind of approach to voting right now. Like they're trying to work with the ones that supposedly have the likelihood of winning. So that's why their vote would go to those kind of places. So that's and both parties have been pretty rampant in trying to get their vote in from as many demographics as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a setup in which people are really voting for their specific values, right? In which maybe like between half a dozen and a dozen parties might get quasi-equal turnouts in terms of the vote, right? So, yeah.
So from that point of view, I think probably are Libertarians better off trying to essentially get into the two parties and agitate from within, as it were, and maybe get some seats in and get some people up within, say, the Republican, maybe even the Democratic Party. I don't know how successful they'd be in the Democratic Party, but
I don't like that fact at all. But it's kind of like a harsh reality that we're dealing with right now. So.
Yeah, that's right. Within your system, that probably is the better way to go. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, do we have anything else we want to cover tonight?
Got a question from a dedicated watcher, Peter Wright. Thanks, Peter. So a question addressed to me, actually. What is your assessment of red-pilledness in your age group? My age group is in the 30s, right? Yep. So do you notice any growing commitment by men to values of self-interest, self-determination, and self-preservation over the usual sellout behaviors of sacrificial chivalry and gynocentrism? My best answer to that is I think the younger I call myself the younger generation. I don't know if 30 qualifies for that, but I'm 33. I think there are enough that get it. They get the problem with the self-sacrificial behaviors, and they're not fond of the fact that traditional conservatives keep on pushing for this. I've heard plenty in their 40s, I think, that have that same attitude. I think it's worth monitoring because I haven't spoken to anyone particularly younger than me at all. It's like, see, the usual young people are, the only other young person I know is Elizabeth Hobson or something like that. And I think he's older than me. But hi, Elizabeth. At the same time, I think the younger generation are kind of taken in by that neo-traditionalist side. I think there's a reason why people like Jordan Peterson is kind of popular right now, is because they're really appealing to that more traditionalist sort of sensibility. So and that's the group that's a bit more successful, I think. And the more men going their own way and that kind of group, I still think is kind of it's been for the most part the same. I think. Well, maybe it is growing. I don't know. I think it is kind of growing, but it's not making a. I don't know if it's making a vast difference compared to this resurgence of traditionalism that's happening on that intellectual dark web side. I don't know if that's a assessment everyone agrees with, but off the top of my head, I think. Do you have any thoughts on that too, or?
Well, I note that a lot of people like Jordan Peterson and Milo Yiannopoulos, of course, who's disappeared from the public sphere now, and lots of other people, Christina Hoff Summers and Camille Paglia, who are both called themselves feminists. They talk about men's issues. This is what I often talk about, where a lot of people aren't going to directly identify with men's rights or openly reject gynocentrism at the moment. But I think that a lot of the message gets out indirectly through people like Jordan Peterson. But yes, he is talking about that traditionalism a lot, but he's also peppering it with discussions about the problems facing men and boys and so forth. And so the message does get out there indirectly. That's the way I've been seeing it. So I don't think we'll ever see huge numbers of people coming to us and saying, yeah, we fully agree with what you're saying. But one day, I think we'll find a lot of people are agreeing with what they say without ever having given us credit, quite frankly, because they will have got that message indirectly. That's been my opinion for a number of years. That's why I'm not worried about direct growth of men's rights. I'm not sure that it can grow. I'm not sure that we even want it to. Directly, I think indirectly is where the change is going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I want to point out is that our message, we're trying to reach everybody. So we're trying to get get men and women, young men, young women. We want to kind of get them in on this message of a non-gynocentric, more actually proper context of equality and individualism and accountability. So we'd like more people from both genders on our side, but but
I suppose what feminism has always claimed that it was all about, but of course we know it isn't. But that is ultimately what we want, where we want the law to view men and women the same, so social and legal equality, for example. So where gender will have as little impact on the way the law is applied as possible.
Right. And since you brought up feminism, that's the way they kind of snare young people, especially women, I think, because they're just basically saying that feminism is about equality, and that's why people say, "Well, what's wrong with this?" And kids say, "What's wrong with this?" And they kind of fall right into it. I admit that's the way it kind of felt like to me when I was 18. That it's about equality. Oh, you should be a feminist. Makes sense. I mean, quickly enough, I fell out of that, but.
Yeah. Most anti-feminists and most MRAs are former feminists, and that includes me too. But like you, I wasn't a feminist for very long. I realised too, and I became a sort of non-feminist for about 20 years before becoming openly an anti-feminist.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, and that's because we're the type of people who are actually interested in legal and social equality of men and women, and so you think, well, feminism, that's what it's about, isn't it? Of course, then we've pretty quickly figured out it isn't, and then move on. So, but yes, almost all anti-feminists and MRAs are former feminists.
Right.
So there we are.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to cover in episode 6?
Well, I'll make a note to look into Vivek Deceased Sports and do some more research on that one. How does that sound? Yeah.
Sounds like a good topic for us to discuss next time. All right. Well, thank you very much, Vernon. It's been another great episode.
Yeah.
Covered quite a few topics there.
Yeah, we did. All right. Thanks a lot, Rob.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.